Hashtag Stagecoach Tycoon Marries plain Governess. Her first song silences the entire saloon. The Last Chance Saloon buzzed with the usual Friday night chaos. Men slapped cards on tables. Whiskey splashed into glasses. Piano notes fought against laughter and arguments. The air hung thick with tobacco smoke and desperation. Then she walked in. Nobody noticed her at first. She wasn't the type people noticed. Plain brown dress buttoned to her throat. Hair pulled back tight enough to make her eyes seem wider than they were. No paint on her face. No jewelry. Just a woman who looked like she'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. Thomas Hawthorne saw her, though. He always did. From his table in the corner, glass untouched before him, he watched her hesitate at the threshold. Her hands twisted the small purse she carried. She scanned the room like she was memorizing an escape route. When she approached the piano player, the man squinted up at her with suspicion. She leaned down, whispered something. He shrugged, nodded. She turned to face the room. Nobody was looking. Not yet. The piano player struck the first notes of something slow and mournful. The woman closed her eyes, took a breath that lifted her shoulders. And then Clara Hawthorne began to sing. The first note silenced the table nearest the piano. By the second measure, conversations died across the room. Cards froze mid-deal. Whiskey paused halfway to lips. Her voice wasn't pretty. It was something else entirely. Something raw and honest that made men remember things they'd spent good money to forget. Thomas watched the room fall under her spell. These men who'd never given his wife a second glance now couldn't look away. He felt a strange pride mixed with something like fear. The song spoke of mountains and valleys, of leaving and loss. Clara's eyes remained closed, her body still except for the slight movement of her throat. She didn't perform. She simply let the song pass through her, like she was nothing but a vessel for something ancient and true. When the final note faded, the silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then the room erupted. Men stood. They whistled and stomped and demanded another. Clara's eyes found Thomas in the corner. A question passed between them. He nodded once, barely perceptible. She turned back to the piano player. But how had it come to this moment? 6 months earlier, Clara Bennett had been nothing but a governess, teaching Thomas Hawthorne's niece and nephew their letters and numbers. A woman invisible to most, especially to a man like him. Clara woke each morning before dawn in the small room at the back of the Hawthorne mansion. The space was larger than any bedroom she'd had growing up, but it still felt borrowed. Temporary. The furniture was cast-offs from grander rooms. The window looked out on the stables rather than the gardens. She dressed quickly in one of her 3 identical dresses, splashed cold water on her face, and pinned her hair severely back. Beauty wasn't a luxury afforded to women in her position. Practicality was the only consideration. By 6, she was in the kitchen, nodding to the cook and taking a quick breakfast of toast and tea. By 6:30, she was in the schoolroom, preparing the day's lessons. The children arrived at 7. Elizabeth, age 8, all bouncing curls and questions. James, 10, solemn and watchful like his uncle. They were good children, despite their circumstances. Orphaned by a cholera outbreak that had taken their parents, Thomas's sister and brother-in-law, 2 years earlier. Miss Bennett, Elizabeth said, settling into her chair, "Will Uncle Thomas be joining us for dinner again?" Clara kept her expression neutral. "I wouldn't know your uncle's schedule, Elizabeth." "He likes you," James said without looking up from his slate. "I can tell." "Your arithmetic needs work, James," Clara replied, changing the subject. "Let's begin there." The truth was, Thomas Hawthorne had begun taking dinner with the children more frequently over the past month. Where he had once been a distant figure, appearing only to check on their progress or to announce his latest business trip, he now sat with them 3 evenings a week, asking about their studies and occasionally glancing at Clara with an expression she couldn't decipher. Thomas Hawthorne had built his stagecoach empire from nothing. His routes connected towns across 3 territories. His name meant something. Men removed their hats when he entered a room. Women whispered behind fans. He moved through the world with the confidence of someone who owned pieces of it. Clara found him terrifying. Not because he was cruel, he wasn't. Not because he was loud, he rarely raised his voice. But because when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way that threatened the careful invisibility she'd cultivated. That afternoon, as the children worked on their composition exercise, Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, appeared at the schoolroom door. "Miss Bennett," she said, her tone suggesting important business, "a letter for you." Clara took the envelope with surprise. She received little correspondence. Her parents were dead. Her few friends from the teaching college had scattered to positions across the country. The paper was thick, expensive. the handwriting unfamiliar. She tucked it into her pocket to read later, aware of the children's curious eyes. Only after the children were dismissed for the day did Clara retreat to her room and open the letter. Miss Bennett, you are cordially invited to attend a celebration in honor of my son's 45th birthday this Saturday evening at the Grand Hotel. A carriage will collect you at 7 o'clock. Appropriate attire will be delivered to your room tomorrow. Margaret Hawthorne. Clara read it 3 times. Thomas's mother was a formidable woman who visited rarely and had spoken to Clara exactly twice. Both times to inquire about the children's progress, never making eye contact. Why would she invite the governess to a social function? Clara's first instinct was to decline. She had no place at such an event. But refusing Margaret Hawthorne seemed unwise for someone whose employment depended on family approval. The next day, a box arrived containing a dress of deep blue silk. Not ostentatious, but finer than anything Clara had ever owned. There were even matching shoes and a small silver hairpin. The message was clear: she was being transformed for public consumption. The question was why? Saturday evening arrived with a flurry of nerves. Clara stood before the small mirror in her room, hardly recognizing herself. The dress fit perfectly, suggesting measurements had been taken without her knowledge. Her hair, usually severely restrained, was arranged in a simpler but more flattering style, thanks to Elizabeth's maid who had been sent to assist her. "You look pretty, Miss Bennett," the girl had said with genuine surprise. Clara wasn't pretty. She never had been. Her features were too strong, her coloring too muted. But the dress brought out the blue in her eyes, and with her hair softened around her face, she looked presentable. The carriage ride to town was silent. Clara sat alone, watching the landscape change from the rural surroundings of the Hawthorne estate to the more populated streets of the town. The Grand Hotel stood as the tallest building, its windows blazing with light. A footman helped her down from the carriage. Clara took a deep breath and entered the hotel. The ballroom was crowded with the territory's elite. Men in fine suits. Women in dresses that cost more than Clara earned in a year. Laughter and music and the clink of crystal. She stood frozen just inside the doorway, a fish suddenly aware it had left the water. "Miss Bennett." She turned to find Thomas Hawthorne beside her. He wore a black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His dark hair was combed back from his forehead, revealing lines that spoke of decisions and responsibilities. "Mr. Hawthorne," she managed. "Happy birthday." "Thank you." He studied her with that same unreadable expression. "I'm glad you came. Your mother invited me. I couldn't refuse." A slight smile. "Few do." Before she could respond, Margaret Hawthorne appeared, resplendent in purple silk and diamonds. She assessed Clara with a quick glance. "You clean up adequately, Miss Bennett," she said. "Thomas, introduce your governess around. I won't have her standing in corners all evening." With that, she swept away to greet other guests. Thomas offered his arm. Clara hesitated before placing her hand lightly upon it. "My mother means well," he said quietly. "Does she?" The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. Thomas looked down at her, surprise giving way to amusement. "Rarely," he admitted, "but occasionally her schemes align with happier outcomes." He led her through the crowd, introducing her to business associates and their wives. Clara nodded and smiled and said as little as possible. She felt the curious glances, heard the whispered questions. Why was Thomas Hawthorne escorting his governess around like she mattered? An hour into the evening, the small orchestra took a break. In that momentary lull, Thomas's mother tapped a spoon against her glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "as you know, we're celebrating my son's birthday. I've arranged a small entertainment." Clara felt a sudden dread. "Miss Bennett," Margaret continued, looking directly at her, "I understand you have quite the singing voice. The children speak of nothing else. Would you favor us with a song?" The room turned to stare at her. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. I don't," she stammered. "Please," Thomas said quietly beside her. Not a command. A request. Clara looked up at him. His eyes held something she hadn't seen before. Interest, yes, but also encouragement. The pianist waited expectantly. The crowd watched. To refuse would create a scene more uncomfortable than compliance. Clara moved woodenly to the small space beside the piano. She whispered a song title to the musician, who nodded. She closed her eyes as the introduction began, focused on the music, not the stares, not the judgment, not Thomas watching her with those intent eyes. The song was one her father had taught her, about a traveler far from home, about longing and belonging, about finding your way back to yourself. Clara didn't have a trained voice. What she had was something more valuable, truth. When she sang, she forgot to be afraid, forgot to be small, forgot everything except the story in the song. The room disappeared. There was only the music and the memory of her father's voice joining hers beside a fire long gone cold. When she finished, the silence was absolute. Then applause erupted, startling her eyes open. People were staring, not with pity or confusion, but with something like wonder. Thomas stood apart from the crowd, his expression unguarded for once. In that moment, Clara saw something that terrified her more than his usual intensity. Desire. The weeks following the party passed in a blur of confusion for Clara. Thomas began appearing in the schoolroom unannounced. He joined them for walks in the garden. He asked her opinion on books, on the children's education, on the weather. The household staff exchanged knowing looks. Mrs. Winters began addressing Clara with a deference previously reserved for actual members of the family. "He's going to ask you to marry him," James announced one afternoon as he struggled through his Latin. Clara dropped her chalk. "Don't be ridiculous." "It's not ridiculous," Elizabeth chimed in. "Aunt Margaret told Mrs. Winters that Uncle needs a wife, and you're sensible enough not to interfere with his business." "That's quite enough," Clara said sharply. "Return to your studies." But the children's words haunted her, not because she believed them, but because a small, traitorous part of her had begun to hope. Thomas found her in the garden that evening. She sat on a stone bench, a book open but unread in her lap. "Miss Bennet," he said, lowering himself beside her. "Clara." The use of her given name startled her. She looked up to find him watching her with that same intensity that had followed her since the night of the party. "Mr. Hawthorne." "Thomas," he corrected. "I think we've known each other long enough." She nodded, uncertain. "I'm not a man who speaks easily of feelings," he began. "My life has been built around practicalities, routes and schedules, profits and losses." Clara's heart began to pound. "But I find myself—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Distracted by thoughts of you, Mr. Hawthorne." "Thomas." "Thomas," she amended. "I don't understand what you're saying." He took her hand. His was warm, calloused in places despite his wealth. "Working hands. I'm saying that I admire you. Your steadiness. Your care with the children. The way you carry yourself with dignity despite—" He trailed off. "Despite my station," she finished for him. "Despite the world's failure to recognize your worth," he corrected. "I would like to remedy that failure." Clara stared at him, still not comprehending. "I'm asking you to marry me, Clara." The words hung between them. Impossible words. "Why?" she whispered. Thomas looked genuinely puzzled. "Because I want to. Because the children need a mother. Because you bring music into rooms that have been silent too long." It wasn't a declaration of passionate love, but it was honest. And from a man like Thomas Hawthorne, perhaps that was worth more. "Yes," Clara heard herself say. "I will marry you." They were married in the town church 3 weeks later. Clara wore a cream-colored dress that Margaret had commissioned. The children stood beside them, Elizabeth beaming, James solemn but pleased. The town turned out to witness the unlikely match. The stagecoach Tycoon and the plain Governess. Whispers followed them down the aisle after the ceremony. "He must have gotten her in trouble. It's for the children's sake. She must have tricked him somehow." Clara held her head high. Let them talk. She knew the truth was both simpler and more complicated than they could imagine. The wedding reception was held at the mansion. Clara moved through it like someone in a dream, accepting congratulations from people who had never noticed her before. Thomas remained at her side, his hand occasionally pressing against the small of her back, guiding her. That night, alone in what was now their bedroom, Clara stood awkwardly as Thomas entered from his dressing room. He had given her time to prepare herself, time she had spent staring at her reflection in the large mirror, wondering who this woman was in her fine nightgown with her hair loose around her shoulders. "You're trembling," Thomas said, crossing to her. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize." He took her hands in his. "We don't have to. That is, I understand this is sudden." Clara looked up at him. In the lamplight, she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes. He wasn't a young man with a young man's impatience. "I'm your wife now," she said simply. "Yes." He touched her cheek. "My wife." When he kissed her, Clara closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel. Not fear. Not uncertainty. Just the warmth of his mouth on hers, the strength of his hands as they moved to her waist. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Thomas's breathing steady beside her, Clara stared at the ceiling and wondered if this was happiness. This quiet belonging. This strange new life that had been gifted to her. She didn't love him. Not yet. But she could. She might. The months passed. Clara settled into her role as Mrs. Hawthorne. She continued teaching the children, but now also managed the household, oversaw social engagements, and accompanied Thomas to business functions. The whispers never quite stopped. The plain governess who had somehow captured Thomas Hawthorne. The fortune hunter. The schemer. Clara ignored them. She found satisfaction in her work, pleasure in watching the children thrive, and a growing companionship with Thomas. He was often away on business, but when home, he sought her company, sharing meals and evenings by the fire. Their physical relationship remained reserved but not cold. Thomas was considerate, even tender. Clara found herself responding to him with increasing warmth. It wasn't the passionate love described in novels, but it was a partnership built on mutual respect. On most days, that seemed enough. Until the day Clara found the hidden room. She had been searching for a particular book in Thomas's study when she noticed a draft coming from behind one of the bookshelves. Curious, she examined it more closely and discovered a mechanism that, when pressed, revealed a small door. Beyond it lay a room no larger than a closet. A desk, a chair, and shelves lined with journals and letters. Clara knew she should close the door. This was clearly private. But something compelled her forward. The journals were dated, stretching back 20 years. She opened one from 15 years earlier and found Thomas's handwriting stronger and less controlled than it was now. Sophia agreed to marry me today. I still cannot believe my fortune. That someone so vibrant, so beautiful, would consent to be my wife. Mother disapproves, of course. Says Sophia is too young, too frivolous. But when I'm with her, I feel alive in a way I never have before. Clara's hands trembled as she replaced that journal and took another, dated a year later. Sophia lost the baby today. The doctor says she may never carry to term. She won't look at me. Won't speak. I don't know how to reach her through this grief. And another, 6 months after that. She's gone. Left a note saying she couldn't bear the emptiness of this house, of our life together. That she was never meant for this kind of existence. I searched for her in town, but her family claims not to know where she's gone. I suspect they're lying. They never approved of me, never thought I was good enough despite my money. Clara sat heavily in the chair. Sophia, a name Thomas had never mentioned, a wife he had loved and lost. She read on, unable to stop herself. The journals chronicled Thomas's search for Sophia, his gradual acceptance that she wasn't coming back, his retreat into his business. The final entry in the last journal was dated just before Clara had come to work for him. Mother insists I need to marry again. For the children's sake, she says. I told her I have no interest in the kind of women she parades before me. Shallow, grasping creatures nothing like. But perhaps she's right about the children. They need stability. A woman's influence. Just not another Sophia. I couldn't survive that again. Clara closed the journal, feeling sick. Not another Sophia. Was that what she was? The anti-Sophia? Safe because she was plain, steady, unlikely to inspire the kind of passion that could destroy a man when lost? She replaced the journals carefully and closed the hidden door. Then she went to her room, her old room, not the one she now shared with Thomas, and sat on the narrow bed, staring at nothing. Everything made sense now. Why Thomas had chosen her. Why his mother had approved. She was the sensible choice. The practical choice. The woman who wouldn't break his heart because she would never have it in the first place. Thomas returned from his business trip 3 days later. Clara greeted him with her usual calm smile, the children bouncing around him with their news and questions. You look tired, she said as they prepared for bed that night. The negotiations were difficult. He sat on the edge of the bed, removing his watch. But successful. Clara nodded, brushing her hair at the vanity. In the mirror, she studied his reflection. The strong profile. The hands that moved with such certainty. The man who had married her because she wasn't someone else. Thomas, she said carefully. Who was Sophia? His hands froze. His head came up slowly until he met her eyes in the mirror. Where did you hear that name? Clara set down her brush and turned to face him. I found your journals. The hidden room in your study. Thomas's expression hardened. You had no right. Perhaps not. But I am your wife. Yes, he said, his voice tight. You are. But not your first. He stood abruptly, moving to the window. No, not my first. Why didn't you tell me? It wasn't relevant. Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. Wasn't it? You don't think I deserved to know you'd been married before? That you'd loved someone else? That was a long time ago. Not in your heart. Thomas turned to look at her, his expression unreadable again. What do you want me to say, Clara? That I loved her? I did. That she broke me when she left? She did. That I spent years trying to forget her? I tried. And then you married me, Clara said softly. Because I'm nothing like her. Thomas didn't deny it. Couldn't, perhaps. I should go, Clara said, rising from the vanity. Go where? I don't know. Anywhere. I can't stay here knowing I'm just a replacement. A safe alternative. You're my wife, Thomas said, as if that settled everything. In name. In law. But not in your heart. Clara moved toward the door. I need time to think. Clara. But she was already gone, hurrying down the hallway to her old room, locking the door behind her. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by the window, watching the moon track across the sky, thinking about songs and silence and the ways people used each other to fill empty spaces. In the morning, she dressed in her old brown dress, pinned her hair severely back, became Miss Bennet again, if only in appearance. Thomas was waiting in the breakfast room, the children already gone to play. You're leaving, he said. Not a question. Yes. Where will you go? Clara met his gaze steadily. To town. I've asked Mrs. Winters to arrange a room for me at the boarding house. For how long? I don't know. Thomas stood, his hands clenched at his sides. This is ridiculous. You're overreacting to ancient history. Am I? Then why did you hide it from me? Why keep a shrine to her in a secret room? It's not a shrine. It's a mausoleum, Clara interrupted. For a love that died. And I won't live in its shadow anymore. She turned to go, but Thomas caught her arm. I married you because I saw something in you, he said urgently. Something real and true. Yes, you're different from her. Thank God for that. But that's not why I chose you. Then why? Because when you sang that night, I saw someone who understood loss, who had faced it and survived. Someone strong enough to build something new with me. Clara searched his face, wanting desperately to believe him. I need time, she repeated, gentler now. Please. After a long moment, he released her arm. Take whatever time you need. But come back, Clara. Please come back. The boarding house was clean but sparse. Clara spent her days walking through town, sitting in the small park, thinking. She visited the church and sat in the empty pews, remembering her wedding day. The promises made. The hope she had felt. A week passed. Then another. Thomas didn't come after her, respecting her request for space. The children visited with Mrs. Winters, bringing drawings and stories and barely concealed worry. Uncle misses you, Elizabeth said during one visit. He's cross all the time. He doesn't sing anymore, James added. Clara looked at him in surprise. Your uncle sings? James nodded solemnly. When he thinks no one can hear. After you sang at his birthday, he started singing in his study sometimes. Old songs. Sad ones. The image stayed with Clara. Thomas singing alone. The man of business and practicality harboring music inside him, just as she did. On the 15th day of her self-imposed exile, Clara made a decision. She would return to the mansion. Not necessarily to stay, but to talk. To see if there was anything worth salvaging between them. But first, she had something to do. The Last Chance Saloon wasn't a place respectable women frequented. But Clara wasn't feeling particularly respectable. She was feeling raw and honest and tired of hiding. She pushed through the doors just after sunset. The Friday crowd was already rowdy. Men turned to look at her, curiosity and something darker in their eyes. Clara ignored them, making her way to the piano player. She leaned down, whispered a request. The man squinted up at her, shrugged, nodded. She hadn't expected Thomas to be there. Hadn't known he sometimes came here on Friday nights. But there he was in the corner, watching her with those intent eyes. When she began to sing, the room gradually fell silent. The song was one she had written herself during the long nights at the boarding house. About a woman who thought she knew her place in the world until the world shifted beneath her feet. About fear and courage and the thin line between them. Clara sang with her eyes open this time, watching the faces around her, watching Thomas. When she finished, the silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then the room erupted. Men stood. They whistled and stomped and demanded another. Clara's eyes found Thomas in the corner. A question passed between them. He nodded once, barely perceptible. She turned back to the piano player. Whispered another request. A song about forgiveness. About building something new from broken pieces. As she sang, Thomas rose from his table and moved through the crowd toward her. People stepped aside for him, recognizing the claim in his approach. The final notes faded. The crowd applauded again, but Clara barely heard them. She was watching Thomas, trying to read his expression in the dim light. "You found your voice," he said when he reached her. "I never lost it," she replied. "I just wasn't sure anyone was listening. I'm listening now." He held out his hand. "Come home, Clara." She looked at his outstretched hand, at the man offering it. Imperfect, scarred by his past, but trying. "I'm not Sophia," she said. "I never will be. I know." His eyes held hers. "I don't want you to be. I want you to be Clara. My Clara." She took his hand. The crowd around them faded to background noise as Thomas led her toward the door. Outside, the night air was cool on Clara's flushed cheeks. Stars scattered across the sky like notes on a page, waiting to be sung. "I can't promise I'll never think of her," Thomas said as they walked toward the waiting carriage. "But I can promise I'll try to build something real with you. Something honest." Clara nodded. "That's all any of us can do. Try." As the carriage pulled away from the Last Chance Saloon, Clara leaned against Thomas's shoulder. Not a fairy tale ending. Not a perfect resolution. But a beginning, perhaps. A new song, waiting to be written. Behind them, the saloon continued its Friday night chaos. Men slapped cards on tables. Whiskey splashed into glasses. Piano notes fought against laughter and arguments. But something had changed. A woman had stood in their midst and shown them something true. Had reminded them, however briefly, that beneath the noise and bluster, there was still music to be found. Still beauty in unexpected places. And sometimes, that was enough. Total _char_count, 27,146.